What if the rarest thing in the universe isn't life, but a mind that can wonder where it came from? The Great Filter Hypothesis suggests that somewhere along the road from lifeless rock to starfaring civilization, there are one or more steps so unlikely that almost nothing makes it through. Most of these aren't about alien empires falling, they're about life never reaching the point where empires are possible at all. Somewhere, a set of necessary conditions or a chain of evolutionary hurdles, from a stable, habitable planet or the origin of cells to the rise of intelligence, quietly stops billions of worlds in their tracks. Today, we'll be counting down the 10 best candidates for those barriers, looking not for doomsday events, but for the improbable twists of biology, chemistry, and planetary history that make a thinking mind one of the universe's rarest treasures. The Fermi Paradox asks a haunting question. If the galaxy is old and vast, and the ingredients for life are everywhere, why don't we see anyone else anywhere? And this is the key piece. The Fermi Paradox seeks to explain not why life is rare, or why intelligence is rare, but specifically why we, at our current level of technological ability, do not see or hear from what we call loud aliens. Loud aliens leave a very detectable presence. By being big, visible, and long-lasting, they are all three. In short, they are glaringly obvious, and these don't seem to exist, at least currently. So most of the Fermi Paradox discussions focus on quiet aliens, those that may not be noticeable to us or don't last long, or simply do not exist. Our proposed answer is that life, intelligence, or technological civilizations must pass through a series of extremely unlikely steps, bottlenecks so rare they've been called great filters. Some of these filters are singular hurdles that are individually incredibly unlikely, while others like rare earth are broader categories of many specific conditions that in conjunction add up to making life very rare. And we do mean very rare, as the universe is huge and colonizing stars or even between galaxies is probably viable. We have many episodes explaining how it can likely be done. As a result, this tends to tilt us to assuming the great filters are the likely answer, but we do not know which, or even if there will be only a single great filter, or just a lot of major ones that pile on. And indeed, we tend to assume that even if one factor was way more improbable than the others, that there is still a lot of other hurdles dragging the odds down by orders of magnitude. These filters might lurk anywhere in our past, explaining why intelligent life is vanishingly rare, or they might be ahead of us, meaning most civilizations never survive long enough to spread to the stars. For today's list, we're looking at the 10 best candidates for a great filter. Best meaning not just popular, but plausible based on what we know from science, evolutionary history, and cosmic conditions. I'm including a few qualifiers here. We're looking for bottlenecks that apply broadly to the universe, not just quirks of Earth's own history. They must be difficult to overcome, not merely inconvenient, and they should have a strong case for radically reducing the odds of interstellar civilizations arising. Since we cannot possibly do them in order of probability, as they are all hypothetical and with minimal data, we'll do them in approximate chronology, starting approximately at the beginning. We'll also make room along the way for honorable mentions, filter ideas that are intriguing but perhaps too narrow, too speculative, or too dependent on assumptions we cannot yet confirm. And we'll address a few popular filters that, while fun to imagine, may not hold up well under scrutiny, or which often get proposed as a great filter but probably should not be. The numbering is also arbitrary. I jotted down a dozen, then sandwiched our first two together because they're not clearly delineated, then just merged the last two because they kind of are too, and it made an even 10. A couple are also not super likely great filters in of themselves, but are probably major ones, and also necessary steps on the path to a bigger one. And indeed, most of the filters are compounded from multiple smaller but related ones. Since we have to discuss them anyway, they get their own number. Ultimately, the goal isn't to settle the debate, as we simply lack the data to prove one over another. Plus, as I often say, it's not that great filters is the best Fermi Paradox solution, it's that it's the least bad one. Every solution I've encountered had some problems with it. For great filters, it's just the general feeling that life should tend to benefit from complexity and intelligence and technology, and thus evolve that way, and that there would seem to be just so many places it could get a foothold in the cosmos. Rather, today we will explore how these great filters fit into the grand puzzle of the Fermi Paradox, and what that might mean for humanity's own future in the cosmos. Number 10. The Fine-Tuned Universe and Rare Earth. It is not only appropriate to begin our analysis at the beginning, but also to begin with both the best and worst great filter, and that's our universe itself, and then all the specific conditions our galaxy, our solar system, and our planet need to have life begin here and be able to stick around for eons. Now, what do I mean by the best and worst filter? If you've ever heard of the Fine-Tuned Universe or seen our episode on it, then you've probably heard someone throw out the number that a universe with conditions that can permit life are something like only 1 in 10 to the 120th power, which would be 1 in a trillion, 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 which is obviously not very likely. This number is pretty debatable, and I think it is high, even ignoring Boltzmann brain options. And again, we did an episode on it, but it's going to be a very big number if the various physical constants are actually randomly determined. Even on the small or generous side, it's going to be a number bigger than the total number of atoms in the whole universe, and you would obviously consider it beyond simply improbable to be one atom in the universe that was green if every other one was red. Now, why this matters philosophically is that it tells us we are probably not the whole universe. Your big three lines of reasoning here go that there is either A, an insanely larger and mostly dead greater reality, a multiverse, and we just happen to be a place where life can exist, and nobody exists in those other bits to comment on how probable their existence was, or rather, was not. B. There are unknown rules and factors that predispose our universe to have those life-friendly physical constants, implying a more fundamental level of reality beyond what we can see. And C. The odds are low, if random, but they were not random. Someone selected or set them, and this can be God or programmers from a higher level of reality than us. Take your pick. None of these options have any significant scientific evidence for or against them. The first key point is that if we are assuming option A, then we're talking about one heck of a great filter, odds like 1 in 10 to the 120th power. Even if we hedge our bets by knocking that down a few dozen orders of magnitude. For options B and C, the implication is that there's no real paradox at all. Either someone made the universe and set it up however they wanted, or we simply don't understand the rules well enough to see why the situation isn't truly paradoxical. That's worth noting, because we tend to assume it is not actually a paradox, just the label it got stuck with. Every time we do a Fermi Paradox episode, someone will inevitably post about how it's not really a paradox, as if the rest of us thought the whole situation was literally impossible, rather than just currently puzzling. The second key point is that it still makes for a poor Fermi Paradox solution. While there are countless other universes, some deeper foundational layer of reality, or a higher level where God or programmers designed this one, we can only observe this universe, and only a small patch of it, and yet it's the sheer immensity of that observable volume that spawned the whole paradox in the first place. It's reasonable to assume that whoever or whatever set up the conditions here wouldn't make them blatantly contradictory with the outcomes we see. As a result, it does not matter whether the universe is fine-tuned by coincidence or by design. Our conclusions are drawn from the small portion of this single universe that we can actually examine. And so long as we assume faster light travel is impossible, our practical observational window shrinks to about 5 to 7 billion light-years radius maximum. For life beyond that to send signals we could detect here, it would have to emerge so quickly and so prolifically that its absence in the much more hospitable, later universe we now inhabit would be absurd. In reality, 5 to 7 billion light-years is probably generous. I usually say more like 1 to 2 billion light-years, or roughly within our supercluster, simply because beyond that we have no realistic expectation of spotting anything. Earlier in the universe's history, conditions were generally worse for life, so speculating about civilizations out there is just that, speculation without data. And that's the same problem the fine-tuned universe idea has as a great filter solution. It's working off a dataset that's tiny, incomplete, and inherently biased towards our local cosmic neighborhood. Within that small sphere, any civilization would have to rise both early enough and loud enough for its signals to reach us by now. Staring at a galaxy a billion years before it spawns intelligence won't tell you whether it's now home to 10,000 interstellar empires. As we zoom in on our area though, we do have other improbabilities to consider. Our galaxy is a big one, made by cannibalizing a lot of smaller galaxies, and will eventually merge with Andromeda and Triangulum, along with a bunch of smaller galaxies near us to form one big galaxy, the Milkdromeda Galaxy. I hate that name. And these sorts of mergers can have both large positive and negative aspects for life. We don't know how they stack up yet. We can say we are in a relatively isolated region of the universe, the rural hinterland as galactic conglomerations go, and in our own galaxy we have a rather stable star, which is particularly important for surface life, and that a lot of other conditions are in place that make Earth potentially a rather rare and exceptional place. One where life is possible, but we don't know how rare those conditions are, and it's also a good reminder of scale. Virtually every atom in this solar system is in the Sun, and of what remains, about 3 parts per million are on Earth, where only maybe the top few millionths or so of those atoms are actually involved in biology. So even in this one unique universe, in this one lonely galaxy, on our pale blue dot around our stable Sun, only the thin top layer is alive. And indeed the conditions here are probably not the ones where that life began. But for scale, 2 last notes before we move on. First, if we start with that 1 in 10 to 120 power fine-tuned universe figure, then say only our little galaxy cluster out there are the nearest billion held life, and only 1 in a trillion of those stars had life, and that only a billionth of the solar system was actually alive or closely involved, then we've gone from 1 in 10 to 120 to 1 in 10 to 150. That is a massive leap, but it can seem deceptively small because our brains simply aren't built to grasp numbers at that scale. It drives home how quickly an improbably life-rich universe can become an almost entirely lifeless one. Second, filters stack fast. Even modest ones tend to be worse than a coin flip, and stacking 20 50-50 events gives you odds about 1 in a million. Raise each event to 1 in 6 odds, like rolling a specific face on a die, and that jumps to 1 in 6 to the 20th power, roughly 1 in 3.65 quadrillion, which will leave you with maybe 4,500 examples in a 4 billion light-year wide bubble centered on Earth. And that's before we even get into the dozens of candidate great filters out there. The 10 we are examining today are the ones where the odds might be far worse than 50-50, or even 1 in 6, sometimes closer to 1 in 1,000, 1 in a million, or lower. And for some, like the origin of life itself, Abiogenesis, we have no real clue what the odds are, and only a handful of educated guesses about where it could even happen. Number 9. Abiogenesis, the origin of life. Abiogenesis, the emergence of life from non-living chemistry, is one of the most famous great filter candidates, and for good reason. It only had to happen once for us to be here, but we still have no idea how likely it is to occur. It might be inevitable on any Earth-like world given enough time, or it might be so rare that it's only happened once in this observable universe. The problem is, we have no real data, just a sample size of 1. On Earth, life appears to have arisen astonishingly quickly, geologically speaking, possibly within a few hundred million years after the planet cooled enough to sustain oceans. This may or may not have been complicated by our own moon and its cataclysmic formation. See our Fermi Paradox episode on large moons for a deep dive on that, though it is itself often considered a great filter candidate. Either way, life emerging at that speed is sometimes taken as evidence that life emerges easily wherever conditions are right. But that's a dangerous inference. We could simply have gotten lucky early on, or be looking at survivor bias. Maybe countless wars had the same conditions, but nothing happened. And since we can't rewind history and watch the experiment play out a billion times, we are left guessing. Moreover, it could be that such early formation doesn't mean life gets around to forming everywhere eventually, but instead the conditions to let it form were very short, such as the possibility that life might have formed near natural nuclear reactors that may have existed early in Earth's history and cannot exist on any planet for long, a notion we will examine next month. Abiogenesis could be a near certainty anywhere with liquid water, complex chemistry, and stable energy sources. If nothing else, it seems nigh impossible anywhere else, with a few exceptions like ammonia or methane-based life we've also discussed in other episodes. So it may be common for life to form in a decent organic soup, or it could require extraordinary chains of events, specific minerals, a rare sequence of environmental changes, just the right molecular building blocks in just the right order, at just the right time. Even a small percentage difference of a chemical in a solution can massively alter the way the chemistry works out, and we could potentially have needed multiple elements, each to within 1% of the ideal concentration in a given soup. If that's the case, then the universe could be littered with planets where life almost happened but did not. You'll see folks try to run the numbers on this, with attempts ranging in skill and reasoning, but even the best can't narrow it down to even 10 or 12 orders of magnitude, which again is the difference between one star in a galaxy having life and every single star system having life. Worse still, we don't even know the when or where constraints. Did life have to form on a planet's surface, in tidal pools or hydrothermal vents? Could it happen in ice crusts above subsurface oceans, like on Europa and Enceladus? Could it occur in the atmosphere of a gas giant, or in the warm chemistry of a primordial comet cloud? Each possibility has its own probability curve, and the more restricted the actual path, the rarer life may be. If abiogenesis is truly rare, then we may already have passed the Great Filter before life ever got going here. That would make our galaxy, or even the whole observable universe, largely barren, not because civilizations fail later, but because they never even get started. Number 8. Complex cells and eukaryotes. Even if life emerges easily, that doesn't mean we'll ever get beyond the microbial stage. For over 1 billion years, Earth's biosphere was ruled entirely by simple, single-celled prokaryotes, bacteria and archaea. They are incredibly successful, adaptable, and hardy, but they never built starships. Photosynthesis arose at least a few hundred million years before cells got that next level of complexity, and is vital to allowing it, as being able to harness sunlight for power instantly kicks you up at least a couple orders of magnitude above what other planetary power sources might permit in terms of total life and biomass. But it is not a good great filter itself, as while it is a filter, it is not a particularly hard step for evolution, nor do we think it likely to be a super rare condition galaxy-wide. But it deserves an honorable mention, as for all we know, there are 100 times as many worlds with life as there are ones with open seas and skies, icy moons, comets, worlds buried under near-opaque skies of vast thickness, but with no real possibility of truly complex life emerging. There's a long ladder up from that basic complexity to brains and tool use, and you're not doing it without lots of time and energy to work with, and stable sunlight with a stable sea and sky are probably not too common. Indeed, even Earth's seas and sky have changed a lot since life began. This leap to complex cells, eukaryotes with nuclei, organelles, and intricate internal architecture was a rare evolutionary breakthrough. On Earth, it seems to have happened only once, around 2 billion years ago, in an ancestor of all modern plants, animals, fungi, and protists. Without that event, there would be no multicellular organisms, no nervous systems, and no technological civilizations. This happens to be the favorite great filter of my good friend Jean-Michel Gaultier, whose channel many of you are also subscribed to. And since I am trying to avoid turning this episode into another compendium-length one, I will try to keep our mini entries shorter, now the conceptual groundwork is laid, and recommend him for a deeper dive on this matter, or my own episode on rare complexity, or both. But to give an overview, the most widely accepted explanation for this leap to nuclei is endosymbiosis, in which one microbe engulfed another, and instead of digesting it, they formed a permanent partnership. The engulfed cell became the mitochondrion, a tiny powerhouse that allowed its host to run a much higher energy budget. This extra energy made it possible to support larger cell sizes, more complex genomes, and specialized structures. Without mitochondria, the metabolic limits of prokaryotes may have capped life's complexity forever. If endosymbiosis really was a freak occurrence, a 1 in a billion cellular merger, then the Great Filter might sit right there. Galaxies could be full of worlds rich in microbial life, with thriving biospheres that never make the jump to complex cells. They would be alive, but perpetually stuck at the microscopic level. On the other hand, it is possible that complex cells arise more easily, that endosymbiosis isn't that tricky or unlikely, which chloroplasts in plants arguably indicate. perhaps through multiple evolutionary pathways we have yet to imagine. But since we have only a single confirmed example, we can't tell whether eukaryotes are inevitable or an evolutionary lottery win. If it is the latter, then many alien oceans and forests could teem with life that will never build tools, write poetry, or wonder about the stars. Number 7. Multicellularity and Specialization. Plenty of life stays single-celled forever. From bacteria to archaea to mini algae, these organisms thrive just fine without ever joining forces. True multicellularity, where cells specialize in distinct roles and cannot survive on their own, seems to be a rare evolutionary leap. Earth's history suggests it may have arisen only a handful of times, once in animals, once in plants, once in fungi, and perhaps a few other times in algae or slime molds. Many multicellular structures, like bacterial colonies or simple filaments of algae, are more like loosely cooperating individuals rather than a single integrated organism. Whether it was 6 or 7 times or a few dozen though, something isn't a good great filter, or even lesser filter, if it happened more than once on a planet. Yet it isn't simple multicellularity that interests us. The difference is massive. Real multicellularity opens the door to complex body plans, organs, and nervous systems. The leap to multicellularity likely required genetic breakthroughs, adhesion proteins to hold cells together, communication pathways to coordinate them, and regulatory systems to ensure each cell knew its role and stuck to it, not breaking away or reproducing endlessly, ripping an organism apart. It also demanded an environment rich enough in oxygen and nutrients to sustain large bodies, which is another filter incidentally. Without those factors aligning, a planet may remain forever a microbial world, with no trees, whales, or civilizations to speak of. For all the apparent advantages of complexity, most life on Earth never evolved it, and in sheer evolutionary terms, those simple organisms are far more evolved than we are, having gone through vastly more generations and mutations. Yet every planet only has so much time and so many generations before even the most stable world becomes inhospitable, losing its own atmosphere or being destroyed by its own star. Some stars may burn for 1 trillion years, but life has only had about 1/100th of that span since the Big Bang. The Fermi Paradox isn't asking what the distant future epochs might hold, it is asking why, here and now, we see so little. Number 6. Sexual reproduction and genetic innovation. Once multicellularity exists, evolution still needs a way to accelerate adaptation. As noted earlier, most life on Earth is still single-celled and reproduces in mere hours, so if rapid generation cycles and sheer numbers alone determined evolutionary success, microbes should have utterly outcompeted larger organisms. They have not, and in large part because asexual reproduction produces near-identical clones, aside from the occasional mutation. This limits genetic diversity, making a lineage more vulnerable to environmental shifts. Sexual reproduction solves this by shuffling DNA from 2 parents, generating unique offspring each generation. This accelerates adaptation, purges harmful mutations, and fosters beneficial traits. But it's not inevitable. It requires specialized cells, developmental machinery, and often complex behaviors, making a costly evolutionary leap. However, sex or sex-like processes have evolved multiple times on Earth, so while it is a hurdle, it is hard to argue it is a great filter, just a noteworthy filter, though it will lay the groundwork for a potentially better one down the road. Number 5. Complex animal life. Even with multicellularity and sexual reproduction, life can remain relatively simple. Indeed, most of it did. Think sea sponges, mosses, or jellyfish. To get large, mobile, sensor-equipped animals, further breakthroughs are needed. On Earth, the Cambrian explosion around 550 million years ago saw an unprecedented diversification of animal life forms. These may have been triggered by several unique factors: oxygen levels rising high enough to support active metabolisms, genetic innovations like Hox genes that control body plans, and ecological pressures like predator-prey arms races that rewarded speed, armor, and intelligence. Without those triggers, a planet might remain a world of passive filter feeders, drifting plankton, or sessile organisms anchored in place. Complex animal life also demands specialized tissues. muscles, nerves, sensory organisms, all of which require a significant metabolic investment and evolutionary coordination. Moreover, it tends to require internal ecosystems involving smaller and diverse organisms inside the larger one. Think of our own gut bacteria. The Cambrian explosion may have been a once-in-a-planet event, and perhaps not an inevitable one even here. Had oxygen remained low, or key genetic innovations failed to emerge, Earth might still be ruled by massive algae and swarms of tiny, simple creatures. Odds are good if you're watching this show, you already love science, and sharing that joy with others can be tricky. The best time to build enthusiasm for science is with young kids, but sometimes it's hard to find something that truly sparks curiosity, not just another screen, but something that makes you think, that surprises you, that reminds you how weird and wonderful the universe really is. And that's not just true for kids, it's true for adults too. So when this mysterious box showed up at our house, my kids kept asking about it even before I had them open it. Packed with puzzles, brain teasers, and gadgets, my kids and I dove right in. It's called the Curiosity Box, Summer Edition, and it's one of the few things I've seen that gets all of us, kids and adults alike, genuinely excited to learn. Created by the minds behind Vsauce, each box is curated by real scientists and filled with STEAM-based surprises designed to feed your brain, not your clutter. My kids were fascinated from the moment it arrived, and honestly, so was I. If you're looking for something smart, fun, and just a little bit mind-bending, tap the link in the description to get 25% off your first Curiosity Box and start exploring. Number 4. Extended Childhood and Cooperative Rearing. On Earth, some of the most intelligent creatures, humans, elephants, orcas, share a peculiar trait. Their young take years, even decades, to mature. This prolonged childhood allows brains to grow larger, neural networks to become more complex, and skills be learned from parents and peers, but it is an expensive strategy in evolutionary terms. Raising slow-developing offspring requires abundant resources, protection from predators, and often a social structure capable of cooperative care. Human children are dependent for well over a decade, which is an enormous investment compared to most species. Without a strong family bond or group cooperation, such a strategy would be a death sentence. It is easy to imagine alien worlds where life is intelligent in potential but cannot support this model. Harsh environments, scarce food, or high predation rates might select for quick reproduction and short childhoods, favoring creatures that mature fast and reproduce often, the biological equivalent of live fast, die young. Even species that develop sophisticated brains might never cross the cultural threshold if their young can't afford years of protected learning. And while active maternity is common enough in nature, a lot of fathers get eaten during mating or leave afterward, and grandparents in particular are very rare. Consider the number of factors that need to be involved to have lifespans, fertility periods, and maturation rates timed up so that you could have large families together who are not almost all actively breeding, along with the division that tends to create in packs and herds. We'll see something similar with non-breeding members in insect hives, which we'll examine next month, but those were always non-breeding, not folks looking out for their kids' own kids. A lot of our social interactions and hierarchies are based around this dynamic, and it is very likely that our sort of civilization is inseparable from it. You might need this setup, or a handful of other equally unlikely ones, in order to build civilizations, technologies, and interstellar spaceships. And again, if you haven't got those, there simply is no paradox. As a great filter, this is a subtle one. Worlds may teem with clever creatures, but they lack the social and environmental stability for extended learning. They've never developed technology, civilization, or the ability to lead their planet, or the desire to help anyone beside themselves to do so. Number 3. Long-term climate stability. Life can be tough, but complex life is fragile. Civilizations, and even the evolutionary steps leading to them, require not just survival, but a relatively stable stage to perform on. On Earth, we've had about 4 billion years of life, with the last 500 million being particularly favorable for complex organisms. That's an extraordinary run of stability, punctuated by extinctions, but never fully reset to zero. Long-term stability depends on many factors: a hospitable star, a planetary orbit that doesn't vary wildly, plate tectonics to recycle carbon, a magnetic field to shield against radiation, and just the right amount of greenhouse gases. Even slight shifts can tip a planet into a snowball state, or a runaway greenhouse effect. A planet a bit further or closer to its star might be vastly more vulnerable to either option. Asteroid impacts, nearby supernovae, and gamma ray bursts can also erase eons of progress in an instant. If a planet experiences frequent cataclysms, complex life may never get beyond the starting blocks. It might evolve, flourish briefly, then be wiped out again and again before it has time to develop advanced technology. On worlds like this, the galaxy's equivalent to the Cambrian explosion might never happen, or it might be snuffed out before it leads anywhere. Earth's own record shows how precarious this is. We've had multiple mass extinctions, but always retained enough complexity to rebound. That might be luck. If most planets spend their histories being knocked back to microbial life every few million years, then the odds of producing a civilization like ours shrink dramatically. On the flip side, we must also acknowledge that Earth has changed a lot since it formed, and many times. Stability here is at least partially about how quickly or drastically a change is, not if they happen at all. All stars grow hotter with time, all tidal forces from moons decrease, and so on. As a great filter, climate stability isn't about making life possible. It's about keeping it possible long enough for it to become robust, spread out, diverse, and eventually intelligent, and then keeping it stable long enough for that intelligence to reach the stars. Number 2. Intelligence that produces technology. In our episode Rare Intelligence, we charted many steps needed to go from a simple brain to ours, and it isn't such an inevitable path. The galaxy might be full of intelligent creatures, but intelligent is not the same as technological. Many species on Earth demonstrate problem-solving ability, memory, and even culture. Crows fashion hooks to fish out grubs. Octopuses use coconut shells as portable shelters. Dolphins teach each other hunting techniques. These are remarkable, but they rarely scale beyond the immediate needs of the animal, and they almost never compound over generations into an accelerating technological tradition. Humanity's leap was not simply in tool use, but in complex tool use. The ability to envision an object that does not yet exist, plan its creation in multiple steps, and communicate that plan to others. That requires not just brain power, but also dexterity, social learning, and the mental flexibility to imagine counterfactuals, what-if scenarios that let us think ahead and innovate deliberately instead of relying on trial and error. The evolutionary path to this is murky and may be far from inevitable. Human ancestors used fire 1 million years ago, but pottery didn't appear until 20,000 years ago, and metallurgy only 6,000 years ago. Those were not inevitable, linear steps. They required specific environmental resources, cultural context, and the accumulation of knowledge over countless generations. Generations that already had quite large and modern brains. Even once we had agriculture, cities, and craft specialization, the next leap, writing, took thousands of years to appear. Without writing, knowledge travels only as far as memory can carry it, fading and mutating over time. Writing allows humanity to store and transmit ideas across centuries and continents, a foundation for mathematics, administration, and the preservation of hard-won insights. But even with both writing and math, science, the systematic testing of hypotheses against evidence, is a very recent arrival, only becoming formalized a few hundred years ago. That's after hundreds of thousands of years in which anatomically modern humans existed without building telescopes, steam engines, or antibiotics. This long, staggered timeline hints at how rare the full technological package might be. A species may involve intelligence enough for clever hunting or tool use, but never develop the cultural frameworks, environmental stability, or sheer curiosity to move beyond survival technology. Social pressures might discourage innovation, or useful knowledge might be lost faster than it is gained. As a great filter, this step is daunting. Even on a planet teeming with life and clever minds, only a perfect storm of traits, high intelligence, fine motor control, social transmission, abstract thought, and the ability to accumulate and refine ideas over deep time, produces a technological civilization. And even then, it may take a geological age to go from shaping stone to shaping the destiny of a planet. If this filter is strong, the galaxy could be dotted with civilizations that think, feel, and communicate, but remain forever bound to the technology of their ancestors, never lighting the fires of industry, never reaching for the stars. Number 1. The late filters. Surviving technology, ourselves, and expanding beyond the home system. A key part to the Fermi Paradox is that the original notion comes from Enrico Fermi, a man who helped usher us into the nuclear age, but died before the space race ever reached the moon. As a result, his thinking wasn't that life was extremely rare, but it probably wasn't common enough for there to be tons of civilizations close enough to be hearing each other's radio signals. He also assumed that space travel for settling other worlds would be unlikely, and the species would tend to wipe each other out. This was his original solution to the paradox, often held distinct from the broader rare Earth ideas we've been working through today, though I like to break the whole picture into many sub-pieces. Crucially, the Fermi Paradox is not asking, can life exist, but can we see any aliens? And that means they need to be around and active. They need to be what we call loud aliens, civilizations that leave a glaringly obvious, highly detectable presence by being big, visible, and long-lasting. The problem is, such civilizations simply don't seem to exist. Right now, humanity is not a loud alien, which means there are still filters ahead of us, challenges we have yet to overcome before we can become one. Those filters that lie ahead are the late filters, while those that come after life begins but before spacefaring are what I call mid-filters, essentially the road to space. In our list today, filters 2 through 8 were the mid-filters, while filters 9 and 10 cover the early steps. The two big late filters are straightforward: do not destroy yourself, and find space travel both practical and desirable. There are variations. It's fine if you replace yourself with robots that also want to survive and colonize space. They'd still count as aliens in the cosmic sense. It's fine if you blow yourself up, and 10,000 years later, your descendants rebuild civilization. Or if 1,000,000 years later, raccoons or rats evolve into something spacefaring. Those timescales are trivial on a galactic stage. As for whether space travel is possible, we've probably got at least 100 episodes explaining why I think it is. And yes, as president of the National Space Society, I am arguably a little biased, though I offer that title mainly to assure skeptics that I've done my homework, and you can watch those episodes and decide for yourself. Which one do I personally think is the real number 1? I don't allow myself a firm favorite, because I talk about this subject a lot and want to maintain some neutrality. They all have their flaws, but I tilt toward number 2. Now that life-bearing plants are common, I doubt that, or that they're full of complex life, since I suspect most are dead, and most that are not host only algae and lichen. Rather, I think the real choke point is there are very few evolutionary paths to big brains that are also paired with the social structure needed for large, stable, innovative societies, ones that don't calcify into rigidity for efficiency's sake. Still, if I'm honest, my number 1 candidate for the Great Filter is all of the above. Each step in this list takes its toll, winnowing down the numbers until very few examples remain, even in an immense universe. Civilizations may be so rare we could well be the first to exist, which only makes it all the more important that we ensure our survival. Because if we succeed, we can one day go out into the galaxy and become loud aliens ourselves, even if no one else is around to hear us. The stars may be silent now, but if we endure, we can be the first to break that silence. And in a galaxy that's waited billions of years for someone to speak, that's a voice worth making last.